show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg. Tony's got the bad idea for us this week. Tony, what do you got?
We're going to be talking about the USS William D. Porter. It's a U.S. naval vessel during World War II that basically was just a kind of steaming calamity, its entire service.
So, this bad idea was the fact that this ship existed, or it just did a bunch of dumb stuff?
There's a lot of little bad ideas inside here, and that's actually the first thing I've written down here. It's like, sometimes this show we blur the lines between bad ideas, bad luck, and just plain old calamity, as well as incompetence. The USS William D. Porter seems like it might have been on the bad luck side, as this World War II destroyer found new and fascinating ways to completely screw up every situation it was ever in. It didn't matter if it was just backing out of a harbor or nearly killing Franklin Roosevelt, this ship was the Wile E. Coyote of the U.S. Navy.
There's always one. Just law of large numbers, like if you make 100 ships, one of them's gonna almost end up accidentally killing the president.
The ship was laid down in the shipyards of Orange, Texas in May of 1942, and was considered to be one of the many assembly line-style destroyers that the U.S. was producing for the war. It was to be an escort for the USS Iowa as it crossed the Atlantic.
So this is just a regular destroyer. As a ship, there's nothing special or significant about it. They didn't, build it with a circle hull instead of, the streamlined hull for some stupid reason. It's just a regular boat.
Just a regular boat that was like many, many other U.S. destroyers. And it was a pretty well-equipped gunship. It had 10 torpedoes, each with a 500-pound warhead, and also a lot of depth charges, artillery weapons, and several anti-aircraft guns. So it was very well armored, and it carried about 273 sailors, so a decent-sized ship still. As the ship departed Norfolk, the Willy Dee forgot to check its mirrors, or rather it backed out, scraping along the side of its sister ship.
I don't know if anybody else is going to have this mental image, but there's a SpongeBob cartoon where he ends up working for the Flying Dutchman, and he's driving his ship, and there's just several scenes in a row where he's, scraping it along some rocks, and Patrick is just like, "You're good, you're good."
We saw that one in San Antonio.
You did?
I've seen very little SpongeBob, but that was one whenever we were actually all together in San Antonio. You might have already left the house.
I was not there at the time.
In this situation, the anchor wasn't quite pulled up, and so it ripped off most of the lifeboat's railings and the captain's jig from the destroyer next to it.
Oh, boy. I love this story, Tony.
Thankfully for the Willy Dee, it only suffered a scratched anchor. Because of the importance of their mission, which was not entirely known to the small fleet accompanying the Iowa, they were to maintain strict radio silence, especially as they passed through seas that were suspected to have German submarines in them. On the Iowa itself was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Secretary of State, as well as a myriad of highly ranked military officials. They were on their way to Tehran and Cairo for a conference between Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt.
Which is why they needed to be quiet. I just want to be clear here. That's why they were supposed to not get seen.
Yeah, they needed to be quiet, and they also didn't even tell the other people in this fleet.
Because you don't want to get the president and the Secretary of State all blowed up.
Yeah, and a couple generals in that whole situation. That would have just been a very, very bad thing for the war effort. And on a weird side note, the only time a bathtub has ever been installed on a battleship was for FDR, because he was paralyzed and he was unable to use a standard military shower. So in the USS Iowa, there's this little tub that usually has a mini battleship of the Iowa inside of it.
That's so sweet, Tony. I just think that's the most adorable thing.
The very next day after leaving port in Norfolk, in formation with the Iowa, they hit rough seas. A giant explosion racked the fleet, and immediately they began to take evasive maneuvers, believing that a submarine had attacked. After some moderate panic, the Willy Dee had to break radio silence to let the fleet know that they had an oopsie on the deck. A poorly secured depth charge had rolled from the ship and into the sea, detonating in the water. Someone had forgotten to secure the safety switch on the depth charge, so in essence the William D. Porter was cruising with a live depth charge on its deck.
Are you sure you're just not reading, from an unproduced Jonah Hill, Seth Rogen movie script?
It's what it feels like, it really does. And like I said, It's not a bad idea to build a U.S. destroyer. This doesn't fit exactly with what we do here, but it was so calamitous that I wanted to talk about it anyway.
This is delightful. Please continue.
Later in the same day, a rogue wave hit the ship and tore everything else off of the deck and into the sea. And unfortunately, this included one sailor who was never seen again.
Yeah.
What was supposed to be complete radio silence turned into the hourly update stream reporting every problem from the Willy Dee. And the Willy Dee, I didn't explain, is what the sailors on the ship actually called it. It's the William D. Porter. The next day, Roosevelt wanted the ships to do a defense exercise so he could see how the ships would do if they actually came under attack. The Iowa sent out weather balloons to be used for anti-aircraft targets, and in an effort to redeem itself, the crew of the Willy Dee fought hard to destroy the balloons.
I can't imagine why Roosevelt would have been unconfident in this fleet's ability.
I mean, it's so much competence.
It's been running like a Swiss watch up until now.
And at this point, the Willy Dee decided to fire off a simulated torpedo for the exercise. Generally, an engineer would remove the primer from a torpedo so everything would be safe and they would simply go through the motions of the firing. This engineer did not.
So it wasn't, when you say they fired a dummy torpedo, what you mean is they fired a torpedo.
A dummy fired a torpedo. Yes.
They were dummies that fired a torpedo.
And in their formation, the Iowa was about 6,000 yards away, but it now had a 500-pound warhead on a high-speed torpedo gliding towards it. Pandemonium broke out on the ship. Since radio silence had been established again, the Willy Dee decided they were going to try to not break it this time, and they used sea lantern signals to notify the Iowa of its impending doom. Of course, the signals they were using were wrong. They told the Iowa that they had sent the missile in the entirely opposite direction, and then they told the Iowa to turn the wrong direction, and after several other misread signals, they broke radio silence.
So is this just like the guy on the semaphore or whatever it is equivalent, like panicking, like, all right, turn left. No, I mean right.
I believe that's what's happening because they also had multiple captains yelling different orders and everybody was just freaking out because they had said to torpedo at this destroyer. Actually, I think the Iowa is actually like a full-size battleship.
Yes,
like not a
you are
destroyer,
correct about that.
Yeah. Once they broke radio silence, the Iowa went full steam ahead and turned, just barely being noticed. Roosevelt actually had the Secret Service wheel him towards the angle that the torpedo was coming from just so he could see what was happening. So thankfully, they actually were able to dodge this, and the torpedo detonated in the waves in the wake of the Iowa.
What kind of Secret Service agent takes that order? The president's like, hey, that big thing coming through the waves at us that looks like it might explode. Let's get a little closer. Can you push me closer in my wheelchair, son? I don't know. That's not really a good FDR impression, I don't think, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, that dude at that point should be like, nope! No, sir, I will carry you like a football player to another place.
It's like, have you ever been fireman's carried? Did you wrestle in high school? I'm guessing FDR did not wrestle in high school. Just a hunch. Over the radio, a meek, "We did it," was admitted from the Willy Dee.
At that point, is it even necessary?
Probably not.
We know, you morons!
At this point, though, the Iowa did point its big guns towards the Willy Dee, fearing that it may have been a poorly planned assassination attempt.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, those like 16-inch guns were pointed directly at the Willy Dee, and the entire ordeal only lasted about 4 minutes, but the impression made on the fleet was apparent. There's some murky details here that the entire crew was going to be placed under arrest, but Roosevelt would have pardoned them, knowing it was an accident. Captain of the ship, Lieutenant Walter, was kept as captain. Some internet sites said that he was removed from service, but he actually wasn't. He would go on to become a rear admiral, despite being part of one of the most dysfunctional crews in history.
You know, I have to say, I don't know this guy, and maybe other than this, he was incredibly successful, and there's a very good reason for them doing that. But if there is a single bad idea here, it's that. It's the fact that the guy who was in charge during this horrible debacle did not get removed, at least from the command of that particular boat.
Yeah, considering this is like day 2 of the journey.
Yep.
It's either day 2 or day 3. I can't remember. But it's pretty apparent that he was not doing a good job. Only one man, a torpedo man named Lawton Dawson, would be charged. He was to face 14 years in a hard labor camp. And this was made even worse because he tried to cover up his mistake because he threw the remnants of the primer off the ship. Roosevelt once again intervened, and Dawson was saved from his sentence.
Good guy, Theodore Roosevelt.
That would be the wrong Roosevelt.
Good guy, Franklin
Franklin.
Douglas Roosevelt.
Franklin Delano.
That's the one.
Yes. For some reason we will never be able to understand, the Willy Dee was sent home. It returned to Norfolk where...
Okay, well at least somebody's got some sanity.
Yeah. It returned to Norfolk and then was reassigned to the Aleutian Islands in the Pacific Theater. These are the islands on the archipelago of Alaska. It's kind of like right before it turns into Russian waters. Like just really far out on those islands.
So they're sent to the far end of the Pacific in our territory, near our allies' territory. Granted, the alliance was probably a little bit at the time. We didn't really ever love the Russians, but they're probably not going to be encountering a ton of enemy activity up there. It seems like you guys go over in left field and wait for a pop fly ball. No, further out. Keep going.
Like, just go sit in the stands. Yes. Whenever they were reassigned from this archipelago, they were true to form and they couldn't leave that port without an incident. A drunk sailor fired a 5-inch round from their artillery and it landed in the front yard of the base commander during his wife's dinner party. Thankfully, and I'm not sure how, nobody was killed.
I swear this is just like a sitcom. This is like Hogan's Heroes, but on the ocean.
Yeah.
Only he was actually competent, so that's not fair.
Well, thankfully, like, they started to become a little bit more competent at this point. They would end up in the Philippines, and they would go to a bunch of different places in the Pacific Theater. And while it was often a bumbling mess, they also managed to shoot down many Japanese planes. Well over a dozen, and from some of the unconfirmed kills, they might have gotten a submarine as well. Unfortunately, they also shot down 3 American planes.
I shouldn't laugh, but I'm not surprised.
At this time, it became a common occurrence for the American ships and planes to comment, "Don't shoot, we're Republicans," when coming across the William D. Porter. After many missions aiding the Allied forces, the Porter would join the fight for Okinawa. After fierce fighting, the ship was attacked by a Japanese kamikaze pilot. The pilot narrowly missed the ship, but the plane banked in the water and ended up directly underneath it and exploded. This ruptured the William D. Porter, essentially breaking its back, killing its power, busting the steam lines, and slowly dooming it to sink. With luck that was uncommon to the ship, it took more than 3 hours for the ship to sink, and not a single sailor was killed.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so like whenever I heard that it sunk, I thought that it was going to be some massive calamity with a loss of life, but because it was a very slow thing where the ship just kind of faded away, they were able to get everybody off. They almost got it to recover, but with about 13 minutes before it was actually sunk, they gave the abandoned ship call and everybody got away.
It's, I think, characteristic of this ship. Many of the blunders did not actually kill anybody, right? Like, the shooting down of American planes is maybe the most egregious actual thing it accomplished. It's just...
Yeah, and unfortunately, blue on blue is part of combat. Like, it's a very hard thing, especially before you had better radar, better assistance, better targeting, better everything to be able to identify different ships and planes and everything else.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of transponder technology they had at the time. They may have been developing it, but it was probably still very early stages in World War II, so...
Yeah, and I know that at least one of the Americans survived that, so it was tragic, but it also wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Don't shoot, we're Republicans, though, is still hilarious.
Yes. So what's the bad idea here? Well, first you should probably learn your communication protocol, as well as standardize your wargame practices. Never play war with live rounds. Most of the time the military is only as good as its training, and it seems like some of these sailors may have been rushed through, or the officer corps wasn't good with its discipline. I feel like this might have been more on a training level than anything else, because these are simple slip-ups that shouldn't happen if people know what they're doing. It also didn't seem like they received quite as strong of punishments, like firing a round because you're drunk is one thing when it's a pistol or like a rifle, but a 5-inch artillery round does a lot of damage. Yeah. Or, firing a torpedo.
At the president.
There's just a lot of... Yeah,
at the president. On one of the biggest warships in the fleet.
Yeah, I think the Japanese had one ship that was bigger than that one. Like, I guess there were aircraft carriers, but it's like there really wasn't a whole lot of ships bigger than the Iowa during World War II, and it was the only one that size in the entire Atlantic theater.
It's maybe a little bit excusable because it was World War II, and we had to get a lot of people into uniform relatively quickly. Like, we didn't have a huge standing army, and we mobilized a lot of people from the draft, so that's probably where some of those problems come from.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of the Navy veterans saw huge changes from the World War I ships to the World War II ships. So it's a lot of inexperienced people gearing up for war, and I think most of that comes down to training. Like, if you look at what goes into modern military training, it's absolutely insane how far they go to make sure that these sorts of mistakes don't happen.
I was actually going to say the modern Navy has been dealing with a number of these kinds of mistakes in the past few years, and it is once again down to poor training based on some of the reports that I've heard. Not to besmirch the whole of the Navy, but it seems like some of the training that could be done is slipped a little bit.
Yeah, and like we said, that goes down to discipline and training, and unfortunately they just weren't on point for this particular ship. It sounds like they had some better people on the other ships in this fleet.
Well, we won, so it seems like it. If they were all Willy Dees, I don't know the war would have turned out the way it did.
Definitely not. But that's all I had to say on the USS William D. Porter. Thank you guys for listening to Bad Ideas. If you enjoy this, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/humanechoes. I hope you all have an excellent week. We will see you again soon.
Bye, guys. That was delightful.